All right, peace and black power family. Hopefully you are enjoying your African rising and your day will be the best African experience that it could be. So today's topic will be in reference to all the ways we can use history, even down to relationships, right? We often think of history as just memorizing names, dates, events, etc., right? Like when Europeans teach us history in school, it's like Abraham Lincoln did this on this, that day, but they don't really break down how important history is, right? Something that I teach my lovely African students is that history is the sum total of your experiences. That history is who you are today. If you are in any atmosphere, right, any hemisphere in the world, whether it be the Western Hemisphere or the continent or Europe, whatever, even though we know Europe not a real continent, but that's neither here nor there. So if you are in the Western Hemisphere and you speak Spanish and your religion is primarily Roman Catholic, that is due to your history. Okay? History is the sum total of your experiences, meaning sum, S-U-N, everything put together in your history makes you who you are today. So we don't really think of history like that. We don't really think of history in the terms of our religion. We don't really think of history in the terms of our languages. Like, for example, I am of Haitian ethnicity, right? My mother grew up in Haiti. I speak Creole as best as I can, right? Creole is a mixture of African dialect and French language, right? So that is a part of my history, right? Some of the foods we eat come from our history. When you go into, what I consider Southern food, right, in the United States, they eat something called chitlins. Chitlins comes from their history, from their slave culture, right? We all have a slave culture, but I'm saying from the Southern slave culture of Africans, having to make a way to find their next meal because master was, not feeding them properly. And so they begin to make chitlins. Like even our food comes from our history. When you look at soup jumu, which is Haitian independence soup, it comes out of that struggle of, defeating the French. So our foods are connected to our history. Our languages are connected to our history. This is very important to understand. History is very important. Brother Malcolm said, out of all the studies in academias, history should be rewarded our most attention. That we should pay very much attention to history because it's very, very important. But in the African community, we truly don't. We don't even understand that our history ties into our psychology. Dr. Amos Wilson says if you want to understand a person or a people, you first have to understand their history. You have to understand how we've been belittled about our hair for centuries. And that's why our black women don't want to wear their natural hair. Now, they'll make a whole bunch of excuses. Oh, yeah, they'll make a whole bunch of excuses, right? But we don't want to look at that. We don't want to look at how negative images have shaped our opinions about us throughout history. Our skin color, our hair texture, even with black men who they want to marry. They want to chase the light-skinned girls because the light-skinned girls and the white girls are considered to be closer to white. What does that come from? Our history. But here's the kicker. You even have to understand history when it comes to relationships. Not only to understanding of people, but down to romantic and even friendship relationships. One of the first things that psychologists or psychiatrists do is that they ask you to lay your behind on that table, on that chair or that couch, right? And they say, tell me about your childhood. Tell me about your mother. Tell me about your father. And from studying your history as an individual, something else I teach my children is that you have, my students, that you have two histories. You have personal history and racial history, meaning you don't share the same personal history with everybody. You don't. Not even with people in your family. Because y'all don't spend 24 hours a day together. There's times when people in your family, you go one way, you go another way. So y'all don't share the same personal history. Your personal history is your own personal history. It doesn't matter if you share the same sleeping bedroom with somebody. Your personal history is your own personal history. So they ask you, tell me about your mother. Tell me about your father. How was your childhood? And through that analysis of your childhood, they can determine why you are having problems in your relationship. They can determine why you stingy. They can determine why you're having romantic issues, why you're abusive to your wife, or why you are empathetic to your husband. All these things play a part. History is very, very important. If you don't understand a person's history, you're not going to understand them. You're not going to understand their culture. History is very, very important. And this is why Europeans make us so empathetic to history. We're like, oh yeah, whatever, history, names, dates, and events, blah, 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 blah. But they study history. They study history to the core. In the military, they have a branch of historians who all they do is study war history. This is a fact. They wake up in the morning and talk about, okay, how do we lose this battle of 1853? How do we do this battle? How do we do that battle? How do we, that's all they do. Study war history. But for us, because we allow Europeans to teach us history, right? We don't learn from our mistakes. We don't learn from the mulatto problem, which Chancellor Williams has taught us. We don't learn how interracial mixing has destroyed us time and time and time and time again in history. Dating back all the way back to Kemet, which I call Egypt. How we end up sexing our way out of power with these Eurasians who created a multiracial class that end up fighting against their African mothers and fathers. They created buffer class. We don't go back to the Haitian Revolution, where so many mixed race people fought against Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Toussaint. How the French used them for years as a buffer class. We don't go back to studying that. We turn around and say idiotic things like love is love when we're in a war, and these children will be used against us. Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, or Kamala Harris. We don't understand how these children will be used against us. Partly because we hate ourselves anyway, so interracial dating is a form of genetic annihilation for us. We feel like, hey, well, I hate being black anyway, so why not give my child another chance to get close to whiteness? And then if they marry white, then their child to be white. That's really what we're saying on a subconscious level. But the point I'm trying to make is history is very, very important. If you don't understand the history of something, you're not going to understand that concept. There is no mystery once you understand the history. There is no mystery. There are, and let me say this too. Let me add to that statement. Society only creates the type of people that it needs to exist. So we're in a society right now where you possibly have, let's say, 5 groups of Africans, right? You have the coon African, you have the empathetic African, the one that's like, it is what it is, whatever happens, happens, I'm just here, not tripping African. You have the African who's materialistic, religious, just everything that the white man needs, right? And then you have, I'm just going the ones I remember, and then you have the rebellious African. So when you look at society and we say things like, man, you can't judge nobody, at some point, if you actually understand their history and you look at their characteristics, you actually could judge them. You actually could be like, oh, I know what you're going to do. Because We are not individuals in the way that we think we're individuals. A lot of us think, oh, I'm an individual. But society doesn't create individuals like that. Again, I stress this point. There isn't no such thing as an individual religion. The religion you worship is not individual to you, unless you made it up yesterday. There is no such thing as an individual language. You don't speak your own language. If you did, how would you communicate with other people? All these things connect us. So there is no way, shape, and form that you can be an individual. So when you look at some characteristics, yes, you can say, yeah, I could judge you because there is no such thing as an individual. I know what you're going to do. I know what you're going to say. Now, of course, people change. People obviously change. But given their history and their environment, there is 100% a chance that you can predict their behavior and their actions once you understand their history. And that's what Europeans have learned to do to us. So I want you to know that if you're having problems in your love life, it's because you don't properly understand your partner's history. You haven't properly understand their relationship with their father, or their lack of their relationship with their father. You haven't understand if they're a man. You haven't understand the relationship with their mother, or the lack of the relationship with their mother. And that goes into their history. Understanding them, because history is the sum total of your experiences. Everything that came before you makes you who you are. Makes you who you are. That's why understanding your ancestors is very important to African spirituality. Understanding who your ancestors were. Calling on certain ancestors. Because let's be real, if ancestors were coons in the physical realm, I don't think they got that up out of them. So you might be calling the wrong ancestors. You gotta know your history. You gotta know who was a rider, who possessed that Ogun spirit. When I call on them, they're gonna come with that sword. You need to know, because you might be calling on Aunt Jemima, and that's why your prayers ain't being answered. Because that ancestor's like, ooh, why you causing trouble with these good white folk? Ooh, don't do that now, child. So you got to know who your ancestors is. You got to know who was a fighter, who was a rider. Where did I get this skill of penmanship? Why do I like to write books? Who was a rhymer? You know what I'm saying? Why am I so athletically equipped? All those things go into your history, into your ancestry, and get passed down to you through epigenetics. Big facts. History is very important. When you go to the doctor's office, the first thing they ask you is your family history. Who has diabetes? Who has blood pressure problems? Who has this? Who has that? Because they understand your medical history even goes in line with history. Very important, man. History is very, very underrated in our community, and we don't understand that. And we fail because of that. This is why we continue making the mistakes, especially in the West. With all the books and literature that we have, there's a library on every corner. Every corner. But yet we don't study the most important subject, which is history. When you go into history, you'll understand economics. You'll understand that we can't talk about black dollars unless we talk about black relationships, unless we talk about black guns, black weaponry. There is no talk about black economics. So we're going to talk about building up the black community and making the black community wealthy, and then marrying outside our race. That defeats the purpose. We're going to talk about black economics and build up the black community, and then get bombed, and we didn't learn from what happened with Black Wall Street and any other black community. See, history is important. Y'all don't understand that. History is important. Very, very important. Down to the language you speak, the religion you worship, the hemisphere that you're living in, where you living in, why you living there, the foods you eat, the things we ate today, we didn't eat in Africa. So it even goes down to our diet. It's very important, man. Very, very important. Do not sleep on this history subject. Study history, because once you study history, there is no mystery. With that being said, I thank y'all for joining me. Hopefully, man, share this video, like this video, comment, subscribe. Hopefully this video makes sense to you. Leave a comment. Again, share the video. Again, I just want to know again, if you're having problems in your love relationship, it's probably because you haven't taken adequate enough time to study your partner's history. When they're telling you stories, when y'all eating dinner and y'all at this fancy restaurant and they're telling you stories about how somebody beat them in their family and how their brother was, molesting them and things like that, don't judge them and put them in a box, but understand why they do the certain things that they do. And by you understanding that, you can actually counter. You can actually counter once you know that, okay, my partner was molested or used to get beat by their mom, and you can actually understand them more, and you can avoid certain things. Certain things that you say during conversations, you can be like, oh, I know from their history, this might be hurtful to them. This might be offensive to them. Right? Once you understand the history. Very, very important, man. That's why Europeans, they know our history. They know how to get us. They know going to a black church, hey, Jesus loves us. They know. The same thing they did to our ancestors. Came in there, we painted their face with the stuff. They know how to get Negroes, because they know Negroes' history. But until next time, family, think black, stay black, love black, support black, and that's real African black power.